There have been a lot of discussions recently surrounding the topic of add-ons in World of Warcraft, particularly something that's been coined the Addon Disarmament from Ian Hazzikostas. And honestly, it's been a lot to even wrap my head around because there have been so many blog posts and different articles and different discussions in forums everywhere, with everyone offering different amounts of information. So the purpose of today's video is to try and clarify all of those main points, everything that I think you should know as a player, the what, the when, the why. I'll also try and flesh out some of the reasoning behind what's happening with the add-on disarmament in Midnight, and also I'll share some of my thoughts at the end of the video. Before we get started, I have linked all of the relevant web pages and posts and everything in the description below if you'd like to read into those in more detail yourself. This video is just going to kind of cover the basics and explain all of the major things that you need to be aware of. Let's start off by clarifying what we actually mean by add-on disarmament. Essentially, this refers to any add-ons that can read real-time combat data in World of Warcraft being heavily restricted. In Ian Hazzikostas' main blog post where he essentially originated this term add-on disarmament, he describes it as putting the combat state into a black box. And then add-ons can dip into that black box to make basic UI changes, for example, to your frames or your nameplates, but those add-ons can't reliably know exactly what is going on in the game data to be able to make decisions on things like what buffs and debuffs might be coming or the remaining cooldown of any ability, for example. In terms of which add-ons are going to be affected by this add-on disarmament, we don't yet have a confirmed list, but given that this add-on disarmament impacts real-time combat data, we can reliably expect to no longer use deadly boss mods or DBM, big wigs or little wigs, weak auras, rotation helpers like Hakili or damage meters like details, and a few more. Now, the main justification for the add-on disarmament is to level the playing field in World of Warcraft and to essentially eliminate any competitive advantage that these add-ons have been allowed to give in the last couple of years. Blizzard have offered the perspective that over the years, these add-ons have changed from simple little plugins that you can add into your game to make cosmetic UI changes into these fully fledged tools that can read real-time combat data and then drive decisions within that combat. This essentially shifts the gameplay entirely away from the player and onto those external automated features and guides. A prime example of this is the Fractalist encounter from Manaforge Omega. The main mechanic of that entire boss fight is to work with your raid team to build and destroy walls in particular orders to avoid enraging the boss. Before we knew it, a weak aura was developed to be used in tandem with an add-on that would essentially pilot you as the player, telling you exactly where to build and break your walls for the entire encounter, meaning the entire raid team just focused on killing the boss. I can hold my hand up and say that I and my guild did use that weak aura and we managed to kill Fractalus incredibly easy because of it. But I can't lie, I as the player did feel like I was just sort of on autopilot and I was essentially handing the game over to this third-party extension that was able to basically make decisions for me. And the reason this was able to happen was because of something called the API, or Application Programming Interface, which houses all of the functions in World of Warcraft that add-on authors are then able to tap into in order to pull that data and then manipulate it into creating add-ons. As these add-ons and weak auras have developed over the years, they've essentially become smart enough and fast enough to make those combat decisions faster than any human possibly could, and with unerring accuracy. And because of that, Blizzard are trying to wipe that out entirely, and their response to it is to essentially redesign boss encounters going forward, accommodating for the fact that players won't have those tools available to them, essentially trying to make gameplay feel more fair and put the control back into the player's hand. It also means that they can fundamentally tune their bosses more fairly and not have to keep going back into them and retuning them to adjust around whatever add-ons and weak auras are capable of doing. So you might be wondering, what exactly are Blizzard planning to change about boss encounters with the understanding that players won't have those add-ons and weak auras at their disposal? They've said that they are trying to make more readable telegraphs, which is a fancy way of saying making bosses slightly more predictable. They are also planning to add in more reaction time within encounters between mechanics, for example, to allow players to move to a certain place in the raid fight or to group up or do whatever they need to do. And they're essentially refining boss encounters to try and modify them in a way that makes them challenging given this change, but still fair. Another thing that Blizzard have been working on in preparation for the add-on Disarmament is creating default tools ingrained into the UI that can try to act as replacements for those key add-ons and weak auras that players have relied upon for years. These features are by no means perfect, and some of them haven't even been finalized and ready to be played with yet, but I do think it's positive that Blizzard are already ingraining these features into the game in preparation for the disarmament, because I think they acknowledge that many players have become very comfortable with customizing their UI in the way that they like it, having certain add-ons and weak auras to rely upon, and they've had a lot of feedback from the community saying that this is a really bad idea. An example of one of these features is the cooldown manager, which is essentially Blizzard's response to weak auras. I actually made a separate video covering everything you need to know about the cooldown manager, and I kind of go step by step in setting one up for myself so that you can kind of see it in action. I've linked that video down below if you would like to take a look at it. Much like weak auras, it houses all of your major rotational abilities, showing you all of your cooldowns, showing you which abilities are active, showing you the uptimes of your buffs and debuffs, essentially removing the need to rely upon action bars mid-combat. They're also working on adding their own version of deadly boss mods, so adding timers and alerts for boss encounters. They're adding their own damage and healing meters with server-side validation, and they're adding some small accessibility features like text-to-speech and other audio cue alerts, which can hopefully replace the likes of weak auras, big wigs, little wigs, DBM, everything, hopefully. Lastly, they have also made some initial improvements to raid frames, especially for healers, as they have relied upon add-ons over the years for better visibility and healing during boss fights. Another big question that comes up in this conversation is, will add-ons still work in World of Warcraft? And the ultimate answer to that question is yes, but the real-time combat add-ons that we've been talking about in this video will not work in high-end content, so things like Mythic Plus and raiding. Other smaller, more benign add-ons that are maybe just cosmetic only or UI only, or think, for example, add-ons that you may use for collecting in World of Warcraft, all of those will remain unchanged. But going forward, if you do find that certain add-ons are not working the way that they should, or they're disabled completely, it might just mean that those add-on authors need to update their add-ons with the updated API hooks that Blizzard are working on releasing. My advice to you as a player is to just make sure your add-ons are as up-to-date as possible whenever you are playing World of Warcraft, as there are going to be lots and lots of changes coming from every add-on author in response to this whole disarmament in the next few months. The last big question then is, when will this add-on disarmament happen? All we know so far is that it can be as early as the midnight pre-patch, but luckily, Blizzard have already been implementing those default UI changes that we talked about earlier on, so that hopefully there won't be too much of a kind of down period where the big combat real-time data add-ons are disabled, but we don't have the Blizzard version to rely upon. Hopefully it should be somewhat of a smooth transition from one to the other. Personally, I'm going into this change with a positive mindset, and I would also say that I'm not terribly biased because I've played the game for many, many years now, and I've played on both sides of the coin. So I've played with a completely default UI with just independent add-ons in different places to alter things like my unit frames, my cast bar, my action bars, my nameplates, for example. And I've also played the game with Elf UI for the last couple of years and completely overhauled everything. I've also raided AOTC for longer than I can remember, and I've always used DBM, details, weak auras, the lot. And I do think ultimately this add-on disarmament will be a good change for the game. Especially in the last year or so, it does appear that add-ons and weak auras have essentially been allowed to become so smart that sometimes I don't even really feel like I'm playing the game. Like I said earlier, I'm kind of just on autopilot and I'm essentially letting the computer play the game for me, which does inevitably take some of the fun out of it, at least for me. One concern I do have is from the perspective of accessibility for those in the player base that perhaps rely upon add-ons to play the game full stop. But I do think it's good that Blizzard are working on adding in text-to-speech and audio cues in particular as kind of a stepping stone in the right direction towards resolving that issue. Like I said earlier, I do also think that these default features that are currently being baked into the UI are a little bit limited, and they do certainly have a lot of ways in which they can be improved. But I'm cutting Blizzard some slack because it's their first iteration and it's a first response to a very, very big change, and it's completely unprecedented. The best we can do as a community is to play with these features and feedback as much as possible in a constructive way, essentially so that we can influence the way that those changes are made going forward to kind of design those features around the players and what they need. So to wrap up, a little TLDR for you is that Blizzard are planning on disarming real-time combat add-ons like DBM, Weak Auras, Details, Bigwigs, and more. The changes are planning to come into effect from the Midnight pre-patch onwards. The reasoning for this is to level the playing field and to eliminate any objective competitive advantage in high-end gameplay. And Blizzard are responding to this change by baking in their own features into the default UI to essentially act as replacements to those key add-ons. There have been a lot of mixed opinions in the community so far around the topic of add-on disarmament, so let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are. I'm also planning on working on a video where we essentially walk through the entire default UI setup, going from kind of a blank canvas and building up the UI in a way that works for me to maybe give you some ideas of how you might want to adapt your UI going forward if you've relied upon certain add-ons or weak auras for many years. So if you'd like to see that video, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you see all new content from me going forward. That is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I know it was a little bit different from my usual videos, so thank you very much for watching, and as always, if you have any questions or advice of your own that you'd like to share, please leave a comment below. For now though, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to see you again very soon. Bye!